Okay, I'm delighted to be with you this afternoon, and I'm so pleased to be invited to participate in this very worthwhile parent education series for you all. So today I've been asked to talk a little bit about consistency, and I thought I'd start with a quote. So here we can see success doesn't come from what you do occasionally, it comes from what you do consistently. And when we think about our young children, we need to think about what they're learning, how they're developing, how we can support their success in this. So our young children are working out how to move, how to communicate, how to interact appropriately with other people, how to problem solve. And they're doing this because they're also experiencing cause and effect. They are learning what it means to be a person in their particular time, place, and culture. And this doesn't happen overnight. It only happens with a lot of repeated practice and experience. It only happens when the child tries out different things but sees and experiences the same results. And this then helps them to also build up the skill of how to make appropriate choices. If they have consistency, they see, if I do this, I know this will happen. If I do that, then something different happens. So over time, they start to see the results of their action. Over time, they start to be able to make more considered choices based on what those results might have been. We also know that the more we repeat something, the better we become, the more efficient we become. And as our skills and our knowledge increases, so too does our self-esteem and confidence. The repeated movements also strengthen these networks and connections in our brain, which also allows us to become more efficient, to be able to move in a more automatic way. So let's have a look at what this idea of consistency means and what it might look like. When we look at a definition, we see that in order to be consistent, we act or behave in the same way. In order to be consistent, we have something which has the same quality. This word consistent comes from the Latin, meaning standing firm or standing still. And it helps us to be in agreement or in harmony. We like to, as a human race, we like to find order. We like to find repeated and consistent patterns. And we see this all through nature. We see this in the plants, in the animals, in the natural landscape around us. And this order, this repeated, consistent pattern draws our eye. It helps to make us feel at peace. It's expected and predictable. We also like to create this order, this consistency in our everyday life. So we all have particular rituals or routines that we find comforting. We like to know as humans what to expect. We enjoy the expected more than we enjoy the unexpected. Right? Most of us don't really like change. Right? We might say, oh no, I'm very flexible. I like change. I can be open-minded. But at the end of the day, we don't really like change. It makes us feel a bit uncomfortable. Right? We like to know where we stand. And so this idea of consistency also allows us to build trust. Trust in our environment, trust in the people in that environment, and ultimately trust in ourselves. It allows us to be confident, to know that if we do this, we can confidently expect that this will be the end result. Montessori also says that we have what she called a mathematical mind, a mind that prefers to have exactness and order, a mind that gives us the ability to create exactness and order, a mind that allows us to observe and compare and to classify. And so with this mind, with this order and consistency, we can then also create, we can plan, we can predict outcomes. Okay, so this is all part of who we are as human beings. So now let's look a bit more closely at the young child. What do we know about this young child, particularly under the age of 6 years? So we know that this child likes order. They like to have physical order in their environment, so they know where to find things. They like to have social order, so they know who the people in their lives are. Right? This order allows them to work out different relationships, not only relationships between people, but also relationships between objects and relationships between people and objects, how we use objects, what's an appropriate way to use something, how we interact with each other and with the things we find in our physical environment. This little person likes routine, okay? And when we look at this idea of routine, we also find order here. Okay, so routine is essentially order in time. It's a sequence. It allows us to know this comes first, and this comes next, and it's followed by this, right? And order and routine provides familiarity. Okay, so that's something else which young children like. They crave familiarity. This gives them a feeling of security. It allows them to know who they are. It allows them to know where they are, who you are, and how we all work together in this same space. Tied up with all of this is also the idea that this young child wants to know the limits and boundaries. Young children like to know what the expectations are. They like to know what they're allowed to do, what's acceptable, what's less acceptable. Okay? They don't like unexpected changes because this can unsettle them. It creates worry. I don't know what's happening. I don't know what this is. I don't know who these people are, right? Or in other words, what we know about young children is that they need consistency. They need consistency in the form of order, routine, structure. They need consistency in the limits and the boundaries because they need this to organize the information, make those connections in their brain, and to gain an understanding of how the world works. Okay? If I have consistency, I know what to expect. I can begin to predict what might happen. For parents and educators, this idea of consistency means that we consciously choose, we consciously decide how we engage with and respond to our children. And we choose to do that in a way that doesn't vary or change over time. Right? To be consistent as parents and educators mean that we have the same expectations. So the same rules apply to everybody. Right? The same rules don't change from day to day or from one moment to the next. Because when we have this changeability, this causes confusion and misunderstanding. Okay? even as adults, we don't like unpredictability, right? When things are unpredictable, when we can't expect what's going to happen, we also become anxious. We can become overwhelmed. It can also cause us to overreact. So how do we know that children need and like consistency? We know this because we can see it. We can observe their behaviour. The behaviour of our children shows us what might happen when they don't have order and routine, when things are not what they thought they were going to be, when things don't go the way that they expected. Right? So if we look up here at the top of this submerged iceberg graphic, we see lots of different aggressive behaviour. The fighting, the kicking, biting, screaming, throwing things, hitting. Right? And it can be easy sometimes to jump to the conclusion, well, that this is the behaviour of young children. This is how young children behave. They're messy, they don't know how to behave, they're not very controlled in their social interactions. Right? However, what we need to start recognising is that this behaviour at the top often masks the needs down here at the bottom. Right? And so when we see this aggressive behaviour, this less desirable behaviour perhaps in our children, we react to it. We can make it worse. Right? We say to the child, stop it. Don't do that. You know, grow up. Sit down, go over there. Right? Without actually stopping and looking at the child. Right? And if we stop, if we look at the children, sometimes we can also start to see that this behaviour is their way of telling us, I need a break. Right? I'm tired. I just need some love. I need someone to give me a hug. Right? I'm feeling overwhelmed. I need to connect with you. And at the moment, the only way I know how to connect with you is through this less positive behaviour. Right? Because at the end of the day, at least you're interacting with me. At least you're talking to me. You're seeing me. Okay. Maybe we see this behaviour because the child is hungry or tired. Right? Maybe this child is just so overwhelmed. They have no other way of expressing themselves other than through this activity. Okay. Now, I just want to make the point here because these are very active behaviours, that we can also see this need of the children not being met appropriately in passive behaviours. Right? So the passive behaviours we might see that could also alert us to the fact that the child is not having their needs met include things like being quiet. Right? Oh, that's a very shy girl. She's slow to warm up. Right? Someone who always wants to be with an adult. Someone who wants to be close to an adult or another child. Someone perhaps who's not able to make a choice. I don't know what to do. You tell me what to do. I'll wait for you to tell me. Right? So that's also behaviour that tells us the needs of this child is not being met. Okay. So we can start to recognise that beneath every behaviour, there is a feeling. And beneath each feeling is a need. So when we meet that need, rather than focusing on the behaviour, then we can begin to deal with the cause, right? We can actually start to change what's happening in this child's life versus just dealing with the symptoms, right? Putting out the fires. I see this, I'm just going to deal with it now, but I haven't actually addressed the cause. Okay. And think about yourselves, right? Even as adults, we feel deep disappointment if we were looking forward to something. which couldn't happen. And even if on an intellectual level, we know there were reasons, good reasons, for why that couldn't happen, we may well still feel disappointment, frustration, anger, impatience, sadness, right? And so if we feel this way, it surely must follow that our young children also can feel this way. But they're at a greater disadvantage. Right? They don't have the same life experience that we have to know that this will pass. They don't yet have the language to say, I am disappointed. Right? I'm really disappointed that we couldn't go there today. And so instead, they express these feelings through that behavior. Okay. So this very lovely diagram here is actually called the anatomy of a tantrum. And I do particularly like this because it shows us so clearly all those different stages that lead up to, build up to a tantrum, and then kind of start to resolve. Okay, so as adults, hopefully we don't manifest this externally as much, right? But we still feel those same emotions internally, right? Internally, we're still going through the pleading, the bargaining, the hoping, the wishing, the now I'm getting frustrated, I'm losing patience, I'm getting angry, I'm wanting to stomp and jump and shout and slam some doors, right? All the way through to the eventual, now I'm completely exhausted, right? I am so completely exhausted. I can't think straight. I can't speak to anyone. I can't be around someone and be nice. Okay. And so we see that in a very obvious external way with our children. As we grow, perhaps we internalize it more, right? And perhaps there's an argument for, you know, adults being able to externalize this a little bit more, because that then stops us from bottling up our emotions and feelings sometimes. Okay. So we know that in the moment as well, our young children most definitely don't have the cognitive ability to pause and think about what they're doing. They don't have the words to express what they need. They don't have the ability to stop and recognize what they're going through and how they're feeling. Okay, and indeed, even as adults, we also go through these times, right? We just snap. Okay. And there are many, many different things that can affect this sort of behavior. So here are just some things to consider. Okay, so there's physical factors, right? If we're hungry, we're thirsty, we're tired, we're not feeling in the best of health, that affects the way that we react or respond to different things. There are different environmental factors, right? So the physical environment could be too stimulating, or perhaps not stimulating enough. There could be something in that environment which interrupts or prevents concentration. Maybe it's too noisy. Maybe it's too visually overwhelming, right? There's too many bright lights and colors and noise. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to look. The social environment can also play a part in this, right? The other people around us, whether they are adults or children, can also affect our behavior. Maybe we want to please that person, and that changes our behavior. Right? Maybe we want to attract the attention of that person or copy that person. Okay, so all of these sorts of things can combine and affect our behavior. Emotional factors can also come into play. The need for company, right? Remembering that this young child is very much in the here and now. Right? this young child doesn't really have an understanding yet of different time frames. Right? Later, what does that mean? Soon, what does that mean? Does soon mean I get to go before later, or does later actually happen before soon happens? Right? Tomorrow, yesterday, I don't know. These are just words. What does it all mean? Right? And then it doesn't help when we say to the children, we'll do that soon, but then we get distracted. Something else gets in our way. And so that time frame is pushed out even further. And so the child hears all day, yes, soon, soon, later, later, we're going to do it soon. And it never comes. Right? So that also builds up this frustration, right? This potential for this explosion, if you like, of these less desirable behaviours that we sometimes see. This is also a child who's working out who they are. Right? Who am I? What is my role? Okay, so it also doesn't help if we are inconsistent in terms of how we treat our children, and even sometimes what we call our children. Right? So those lovely terms of endearment, which many of us may use, right, with different people in our family, adults and children, can sometimes be very confusing for young children. Right? Oh, how come they're calling her love? How come they're calling her sweetie? I thought her name was Ruby. I thought a sweetie was something that you could eat. Can I eat Ruby? Now I'm a little bit confused. Now they're calling her cute, but the dog was called Cute. So now I don't know who Cute is. Right? They get very confused. Who are these people? You know, if you've ever been around children, you might have also experienced an occasion where someone has asked a young child, oh, what's your mum's name? Or what's your dad's name? And they get very confused. It's like, it's mum, right? Or it's dad. It's like, I have no idea what you're asking me. Who is this? Mum? Right? She doesn't have another name, right? When we speak to children on the telephone, okay, and we say to a young child, what are you doing? They get confused. I'm talking to you. Right? I don't know, what am I doing? I'm on the phone. Right? How do you not know that? Because you're on the other side of the phone, surely. Right? So it's confusing. There's so much to work out when you're a little person. Right? There's so much to sort out. And when we move things, when we're inconsistent and we change things all the time, it makes it even more difficult. It makes it really hard for this person who's trying so hard, pouring all of their energy into working out what's happening in this big wide world. Okay, so all of these things can affect the behaviour, and we can also affect the behaviour. How we feel can affect how the child might also then feel and respond. Okay, so if we're tired, if we're hungry, busy, stressed, right? This also has an effect on what we do. One day, when we're feeling more rested, more positive, we might show the child that we like that behaviour. Oh, it's so cute, you're so clever, it's so funny, right? But on the next day, or even later that day, when the child does the same behaviour, now we get a bit irritated. Stop that, I have to work. You're being too loud. You're being too noisy. You're messing up the lounge. Go away. Right? So now the child's going, well, hang on, I thought you liked that. But now I'm kind of picking up that you're not really appreciating it. So if I do it again, will you change your reaction again? Maybe I can make you like it again. Right? Some days we're happy to go at the child's pace. Right? We've got all the time in the world. We can stop, we can look at the flowers, we can poke this, we can poke that. We're very happy just to stand while the child watches the ants go by. Right? But on other days, we're in a rush. Right? We haven't got time for this. But our young children don't understand that, right? They're confused. What are we doing now? Why has things changed? What have I done that has caused this to change? Okay, so we also need to tune into ourselves. We need to know not only when the child might be tired or hungry or needing some attention or needing some space, we also need to know when we need those things too, right? Because if our needs are not being met, or if we feel that our needs are not being met, then we also don't have that leftover energy to be able to meet the needs of anyone else, right? Back in the day when we could get on planes and fly, okay, and I've completely forgotten what that even looks like or means anymore, having not been anywhere near an aeroplane for nearly 3 years, right? But back in those days, the safety announcement where, you were told if an oxygen mask, in case of emergency, an oxygen mask comes down, put your own one first before you help someone else, right? So this is the scenario, right? I have to be able to help myself first, or I cannot help someone else, right? I just can't help someone else if I can't help myself, okay? So we also have to get better at looking after ourselves, right? We have to get better about not feeling guilty when we take some time just for ourselves. Okay, so we need some me time, right? And that me time will look different for all of us because there will be different ways that we like to relax. For some people, it might be the opportunity to just sit and read a book, right? To go for a run, to go for a walk, to do some yoga, to listen to some music. It might just be the luxury of lying down and having a nap, an uninterrupted nap. What joy, right? It might be going out and doing some gardening or pursuing some other passion or interest that you have. Okay, so I do encourage you to all try to find some me time, right? Because if you look after yourselves, if you take care of your own personal health and well-being, that then also allows you to do the same for others, right? That gives you the space to increase your patience, to be with your children, to be with your partners, to be with other people in your environments. Okay. If we're feeling more rested, if we're feeling that we have also been seen and our needs have also been considered, right? We are then more prepared and willing to give other people the time they need, right? It allows us to be able to respond in a more balanced way, right? To actually respond versus to react. Okay, so here are some young children who are telling us that they need consistency. They need consistency in order to understand their daily lives and feel secure, right? And if they don't have consistency, they will continue to push the boundaries. They will continue to test the rules until finally someone says, this is where the boundary is, right? So again, as parents and educators, we should not be afraid to set limits. We should not be afraid to set boundaries because children need them, right? We're not being mean. We're not being unfair if we set a limit. We're actually helping the child see, this is how far I can go, right? And once those limits and boundaries are set, once the child sees that they are consistent, there's then no longer any need to keep pushing, right? I don't have to keep asking because the answer is always the same, right? I don't have to keep trying that because the response will always be the same. Okay, and again, this is not just in young children, it's also in our older children, right? our primary school children, our high school children, our teenagers, our partners, everybody we live with, everybody we work with, right? There's a little bit of us that always wants to test the boundaries. How late can I get to work without getting into trouble? Right? How long can I extend my lunch break before someone notices and says something? Right? We're all out there testing those limits and boundaries. Right? We might be doing it in slightly sneaky ways, but we're all doing it. Right? And we as adults also feel a lot more secure when we know where those boundaries are. Right? When we know that those boundaries are consistent. Okay, so we all need to find some balance, right? We all need to find that idea that we are in control and we have control over different situations. Okay, and when we found that, we can then help other people also find that same balance, that same harmony. So here are some strategies that we might be able to try out with our children and, maybe even the adults that we live with. Okay, so we need to stay calm. Okay, if we can be the voice of calm, the model of calm, this calmness, this idea of I am in control of the situation, I know that this is a predictable outcome, then can transfer to the child. Right? It helps them see how they can respond in a more appropriate way. Okay. We need to remember that routines also help young children feel in control. Right? They know what to expect. In the morning, this happens. In the afternoon, that happens. The routine for going to bed looks like this. Right? And it doesn't change. So I have a certain feeling of security around that. I'm in control. Okay. We need to remember that sleep is really important. Okay. And for young children, they need a lot of sleep. Right. Again, just to remind you, it's completely exhausting being a young child because there are so many new sights and smells and tastes and sounds and experiences that they're trying and practicing and working out every single day. Okay. And remember, we also need sleep. Right. I suspect that there are considerably more people now in 2022 who are sleep deprived. Right. Because even sometimes when we make that conscious effort to go to bed early, there is so much on our minds. Right. We can't turn our thoughts off. And so we lie there and we toss and we turn and we make it worse because the longer we lie there, the more annoyed we're getting because we're thinking, I should be asleep. I've got to get up in a minute. I should be asleep. Why aren't I asleep? Right. So it kind of goes round and around and around. Okay. So sleep. Sleep is important. The ability to just rest is really important. I'm just going to apologize because my next door neighbors seem to be very rowdy. I don't know if you can hear them in the background. There's lots of partying going on in the laneway, so just ignore them. All right. Frustration. Right? Frustration, that idea of, now I don't know what I'm doing, often comes when we have a mismatch of skills and challenge level. Right? We get frustrated when we're asked to do something that is too difficult for us. We can also get frustrated if we're asked to do something that's too easy for us. Right? Why is she asking me to do this? Oh my gosh, this is so boring. If I have to do this one more time, I'll scream. Right? So it's important to also watch our children. Right? Have we found that sweet spot, that match where their skills, their experience actually matches what we're asking them to do? Right? Are we being reasonable in our requests? We need to remember that, again, tiredness and that change in routine are often key triggers leading to frustration. Right? So you can see how everything is very, very connected here. Okay. A note now to the parents in particular who are on this Zoom call. I just want to let you know that research tells us young children are twice as likely to throw a tantrum with their parents than with other adults. So I'm going to give you a new way of thinking about tantrums, a new way of approaching this tantrum that your child might be having, right? You want to be thinking, oh, how lovely. I have such a secure relationship with this child. I have such a trusting relationship with this child that they feel they can behave like this because they know at the end of the day, I'm still going to love them. Right? I don't know if that helps you, makes you feel any better. But next time your child is having a tantrum, you want to be thinking, oh, look how much this child loves me. Right? This child loves me so much. They trust me so much. I am such a security person in their life that they have the faith to behave like this. Right? Children don't tend to behave in that same sort of way with other adults, right? With strangers, with educators. Okay? And if you think about it, we're the same as adults, right? Who do you take out your frustrations on? Right? It's not the stranger in the street usually, it's your partner at home. It's your children. It's the parents you live with, right? Why? Because we feel safe to do that. They quite possibly don't appreciate it, right? But we feel safe. We feel safe to have a tantrum, to show them our less desirable side, right? Our less desirable behavior, because there's also that at the end of it, that idea, that faith that they'll still love me, right? We can patch this up and they'll still love me, right? Not so sure the butcher's going to love me so much if I have a tantrum, right? Not so sure the grocer will love me so much if I start throwing things around in the shop, right? So we behave ourselves in front of strangers. We behave ourselves in front of other people who we're not so sure about, okay? All right, so take heart next time you see your children having a tantrum, and just kind of, take a deep breath and go, gosh, you love me so much. Right? That may or may not help the situation. All right. I'm not guaranteeing that it's going to help the situation, but test it out. All right. Have a think about what consistency really means. Okay. So consistency means that we follow through with what we say we're going to do. Right? It means that we don't give in. Right? We don't say, oh, look, you're tired. You're only young. You're only little. You only live once. I'll give you a second chance. I'll give you a third chance. I'll give you a fourth chance. Right? That doesn't help our children. It doesn't show them what it means when they make a choice. It doesn't show them where those clear boundaries and expectations are. Right? It's very unsettling if they move. Right? Being consistent also means that we build trust, right? We build trust by setting clear boundaries and expectations, right? Safety, security is fostered when we know where those boundaries are, when we know what those expectations are, okay? And sometimes people might say, well, we also want our children to develop flexibility. Right? We want them to also be able to think outside the square, think outside the box. And so every now and again, I do like to change my expectations, or I do like to change the boundaries. Right? And there's certainly an argument for doing that as we get older. Right? But first of all, we have to be very consistent with our young children. Right? First of all, we have to give our young children the opportunity to build that security and trust. Right? To trust that this always happens like this, right? Before we then start showing them and giving them experience of variations, right? If we have trust, if the child trusts us, right? They then start to feel, okay, so this isn't quite what I was expecting, but I know Ruku and I trust her and I feel safe with her. So I'm going to go with it, right? I don't need to overreact. I don't need to respond in another way. I can wait and see where this ends up. right? And so we can gradually build in this flexibility, these variations, the idea that, sure, this is the expectation, this is the boundary here, but in someone else's house, it might be this. At school, it might be that. Okay. If we know where the limits are, we can start to relax a bit. We can start to build confidence. The other thing we need to think about in terms of consistency is this idea of working together as a team. Right? So we also know that the young child, and really everybody, not just the young child, the older child too, learns best when all of the people in their lives, the parents, the teachers, the family, the other community members, all work together to encourage and support them. Right? We need to remember that children don't stop learning about values and relationships when they enter a classroom. And they also don't stop learning and creating attitudes towards how they learn when they step out of the classroom and back into the home environment. Right? The home and the educational environment need to work together. The staff at the school need to work together. The adults at the home need to work together. Right? So again, the child understands. It doesn't matter who I ask, the response will be the same. Right? It's not about the child then thinking, I won't ask Rookie because I know she'll say no, but I'll ask Ruby. She might say yes, right? I'll have a look at Ruby first. Does she look like she's in a happy space today? Oh, I'll ask her today. Oh no, she's looking a bit, preoccupied. Oh, I better not ask her today, right? In the home environment, right? Who's the person the children are more likely to ask? Is it mum? Is it dad? Is it grandma? Right? Is it auntie? Is it uncle? Who is it? Right? The children all know. They all know who they'll be able to push the limits with a bit more. Right? They'll know the adults who say, "Oh, look, I'll just give you a biscuit, but don't tell your mum." Right? They know who these people are. Right? So it's also up to us as adults to be a bit more responsible, right? To work together, to be consistent, so the child also starts to understand, well, these are the rules. These are the rules at home, right? These are the rules in our community. These are the rules in all of these different spaces that I find myself in. Okay, we need to be in agreement, because when we provide a consistent approach to our children, then our children benefit from increased trust, increased confidence and security, right? And this in turn leads to more willingness to try new things, to explore, to repeat. And this is the way that we help support our children to learn more effectively, to become confident, joyful learners, to gain positive social skills and behaviours, right? To develop all of those lovely work habits that we want to see everywhere. Confidence, self-esteem, resilience, persistence, creativity, right? The feeling that they are prepared to take a risk and try. Why? Because they already know that the world is a consistent place. Okay? And that surely must be something that, we should be working towards in order to help make our world into a better place. All right. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.